Hi, I'm John Moulis, and here is another video in my series about my time of employment in the Australian Public Service in the 1980s and 1990s. Now, in this video, I'm going to talk about what happened after I left those jobs. I'll start with the Department of Defence, and if there's enough time, I'll go on to Department of Finance. Now, you've no doubt seen my videos about my time at Department of Defence, the terrible bullying that I encountered, the harassment, the psychological terrorism that occurred, just victimising me all the time, the strategy of putting in complaint after complaint about the most trivial matters, the most petty matters, and having those complaints whipped up into federal cases by the bosses, and how I tried to tell the bosses that they were encouraging these complaints, that they were encouraging this culture of bullying and harassment, that I was being set up as a fall guy, as some sort of a scratching post for them. I tried to tell the bosses about that. They completely ignored me. They said, this is the book, this is done by the book, this is how complaints are dealt with in the public service, and you just have to cop it. And I told them, I said to them that the other workers, the other people in the section had ganged up on me, that the strategy was to wear me down, to white ant me, and just until I cracked, until I resigned, or until the bosses were convinced to sack me, or I committed suicide, or whatever, one of the three. The strategy right from the start was to get me out of the department. Now, I went through about Department of Defence, how they succeeded, how I was about to have my appointment annulled, and how I had to beg Bob Hills, the director, to allow me to resign. Now, I already said about just how humiliating, how degrading this was, to be in this little room, supposedly secure room, on the telephone, an old telephone, just pleading with this man to let me resign. I mean, never again, and I resolved that never again would I be put into that situation, that never again will I degrade myself into doing that. Now, of course, he allowed me to resign, and I did resign. I gave them 3 weeks' notice, and Bob Hills, the director, he said to me, he said, "Oh, you should resign effective immediately." He said, "I'll accept the resignation and you can leave at the close of business today." And I said to him, no. I said, I had a car that I had to pay off. I had just taken out a loan for $12,000 a few months earlier, that I still had that to pay off. It was over 5 years already, extended to the maximum term, and that I had to get as much money as possible before I left the department. And my last possible date that I could stay there was the day before my 1 year anniversary, and that was, I think it was the 2nd of June 1991. I'm fairly sure about that. It was early June 1991. Now, as I explained, it wasn't all totally bad. Everybody wasn't totally against me at Department of Defence. There were a couple of girls in the department who I worked with at Anzac Park West who were on my side. I forget what their names were, and I was sent back to work in B Registry in the main Department of Defence building at the Russell campus, upstairs, just going through files and seeing if there were any classified documents on the files. And, they tried to extend a hand out to me, but of course by that stage I was just so embittered so anti everybody. At that stage, I was totally against associating with any person outside the family. That the extent of what they had done to me had so poisoned my attitude towards other people that I didn't want anything to do with them. I just wanted to be left alone by myself without any contact with other people. I wanted to disengage completely from the outside world. The only people I wanted to associate with were my family. And so, and of course, what happened on my final day, these two girls had invited me for lunch that afternoon, and I said to them, no, I don't want to go. I have to do clearances. What happens when you leave a government department, they give you this sheet of paper with all of these things that you have to finalise before you leave the department. And the final one on the list is handing back your security pass, which I did there at Anzac Park West offices. I handed back my security pass, I went out to the door, walked out the door, and that was it. That was it. Now, I was at home. Of course, I told you that I had attempted suicide about a month earlier during that intense period where the pressure was up on me to resign or be sacked. I did attempt suicide, and I was still recovering from that suicide attempt at that stage. And, the following day there at home, I told you that my parents allowed me to move back home. My mother said to me that, your bed's always there, your bedroom is still there, we're still there for you. And so I did move back into home, was there with my parents. They were both working at the time. And it was the first couple of months at home, I was still fuming with anger at what they did to me. The thought that they were still there in their office there, they were still getting their money, they were still indulging in their little gossip with each other and their little sewing circle and all of this crawling to the bosses and everything. They were still there as if nothing had happened. And I was at home, I was on the dole, of course. On that day, that first day I was at home, I went to the Commonwealth Employment Service, which was a government-owned employment office. You had to register there before you could get the dole. Now, I registered there, and I went to the Department of Social Security, as it was called back then. It was before Centrelink was formed, and Department of Social Security paid the dole. So I went to Department of Social Security, registered for the dole again, and back then they had a system where if you were a previous applicant, if you had been receiving the dole previously, you could just fill out a part form and you'd be put straight back on the dole straight away. So I did that, and I was put back on the dole straight away. And I was back on the dole again, back at home, just fuming with anger at what they did. I mean, it just seemed to be so unfair, and me being at home. And of course, at that stage, the day after I left Department of Defence, everything just looked totally black at that stage. I had this massive debt that I had to pay off on the dole and for the car, and I was sitting at home, watching TV and listening to the radio and all that sort of thing. But unlike my previous time on the dole, where both my parents were working, I had my car. I had the little Suzuki Swift, so I was able to drive around town. I was able to do a bit of touring. I went to a few places and all that sort of thing. I used the car. I went around town to employers, because at that stage I still wanted another job, because the car still had to be paid off, and that extra money would have been good. At that stage I had no idea that that I was disabled, that I had a disability, that, you know, and I just had this mindset that I had to get back into employment as quickly as possible to service that debt. But as it turned out that finance, you know, at that stage when I left the department, I thought that finance would be really bad there, and in the middle of the recession we had to have, you know, in the early 90s. But I received a payout of sorts from the Department of Defence when I left. I got anticipated leave from the following year. That accrued, and they paid that out to me. And superannuation there, back then, when you left the job, you got a superannuation payout straight away. You didn't have to wait until you were 65. So I got my superannuation payout. Now, it would have been tempting at that stage to blow all of that money to put it all towards the car, paying off the car. But I didn't do that. I resisted that because it wouldn't have made much of an impact on the car, on the loan. And if you paid off your loan too early at that stage, they put a penalty fee because they couldn't charge you interest for that extra period. So I resisted. I didn't put that money towards paying off the loan. What happened is that I spent the money on trips to Sydney. I got in the car and went up to Sydney every few weeks. I went up to the city gym there, which was a really good gym in Sydney. I went to Bondi Beach. I went up the northern beaches, everything like that. And also, I restarted at the gym again. I had abandoned my gym membership a couple of years earlier, and I restarted at the gym again, and I was swimming at the pool every morning, you know, because they had concession entry at the pool, and I was doing laps at the pool. And so the down period, because I was terribly depressed and just in a malaise for about 2 months after I left Department of Defence. And as it turned out, all of that therapy of going up to Sydney, going to the gym, going to swimming, it really did help me recover physically and mentally. I got back in the game again and everything. And as it turned out, I was better than ever. Much better than when I was at Department of Defence. Because when I moved back in with my parents, they allowed that it was $100 a fortnight board I paid to them. And of course, they bought all the food and did everything. That if I wanted to eat something, there was a fridge full of food, a pantry full of food. You know, if I wanted to have my clothes washed, I just put them in the basket, and a couple of days later they'd be there washed and ironed on my bed and everything. And my parents allowed me complete freedom to do whatever I wanted just about. I was getting in the car, going off to having late night rendezvous and meeting up with guys late at night and everything like that. And I'd be back at home at about 1:30 in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning. It was a great time. I mean, I call that period, 1991 through to about the end of 1995, I call that a golden era, because it really was a golden era. But I was still upset about the way in which I was driven out of Department of Defence. So about a month later, after I left, I sent Patrick Brennan, the boss of registry, a letter. You know, and it wasn't anything dramatic. I mean, it was just expressing, you know, how upset I was leaving there and how disgusting it was and how I hated his guts. Well, would you believe that I actually had 2 detectives, 2 federal agents from the Australian Federal Police came up to the house. You know, my father had a day off work on that day, as it turned out. The police actually came up there, stormed into the house, and interrogated me in front of my father there about all of this business. And of course, it was very much a shameful thing about what had happened at work and everything like that. And they were there hammering me about this. And they were saying that I had threatened Patrick Brennan, that I was making threats to the Department of Defence. And I said to them, I said, there's no threats involved at all. And I patiently tried to explain to them what had happened at Department of Defence and the reason why I wrote that letter. And, and what happened is that they finally left the house, and I had to put up with that from my mother. When my mother came home, my father told her that the federal police had been around and all of that. And I immediately said to her and my father that no further discussion would be entered into about this, that it was over. I wasn't going to discuss it anymore. And that was part of the winding down process from the Department of Defence. Of course, I had a British aerospace calendar on my wall that I got from the Department of Defence with missiles and tanks and everything on it. The day after I left Department of Defence at home, I got it off my wall and threw it in the bin. And I got another calendar showing scenes of Sydney and scenes of New South Wales and everything like that. And I substituted that on my wall. There was other physical evidence of my time at Department of Defence that I couldn't get rid of. These tattoos, for example. I got them when I was at Department of Defence. About a couple of months after I left Department of Defence, I tried to get them removed. I went up to Sydney to a place in Glebe which had tattoo removal. I had one session of removal that cost $165, and that was the one and only session of tattoo removal that I had had. I decided after that, I'll just leave it there, But like I said, it was a time of renewal after I left Department of Defence. And of course, those letters, that letter to Patrick Brennan and Department of Defence, I wasn't intimidated by the Australian Federal Police at all, because I had dealt with officialdom. I had put up with officialdom trying to put their stupid views and their stupid opinions down my throat. I kept writing to Patrick Brennan about this, and I put in a complaint with the anti-discrimination people, the Human Rights Commission, about my treatment at Department of Defence, because my mother was convinced that it was discrimination that drove me out of there. So I put in the complaint to the Human Rights Commission, basically just to tie up the Department of Defence in dealing with me again. And the Human Rights Commission came up with a result, and they sent me a letter saying, to phone them up so that to get the results of it, and I never did. I just didn't want to know, because, that was in the past. It was getting further and further in the past. And so I just ignored it, and they sent me another letter saying that if you don't phone within 3 days, we are going to close the file and no further action will be entered into. So I let that deadline pass, and I still don't know what the Human Rights Commission came up with, but I really do think that the Department of Defence would have snowed them completely, and and they would have found that no discrimination would have taken place. But like I said, after leaving Department of Defence, it really was a golden era. That I consider that a golden era. I didn't have the burden of all of these complaints against me, everything. I was able to live the sort of life that I wanted to live, by myself, without having to come into contact with people outside the family, going wherever I want, do whatever I want. It really was good. Anyway, that's about it. and I'll come back with another video pretty soon.